Welcome to the One Stiletto in the Grave podcast with your hosts, Sonny Ormond and Jane James.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another One Stiletto in the Grave special. Oh, and our guest today is indeed very special. A few clues? Well, he's a weaver of words, a teller of tales. We talk buttons, we talk drafts, and no, I don't mean checkers. We talk drama, we talk rattling teacups, and so very much more. It's award-winning Archer scriptwriter Tim Stimpson! Today's podcast is sponsored by MTL Associates. Would you like a website but don't know where to start? Could your business do with that bit extra? It's less than you think. MTL Associates produces websites for people like you. They'll agree a fixed price for their work, starting from £50 for a 5-page website using one of their templates. And after that, it can be as little as £14 a month. MTL Associates. It's you, but online. Yes, Janie and I are delighted to have as our guest today the amazing Archer scriptwriter Tim Stimpson. Now, Tim joined the show at the age of 23. He was the youngest ever writer on the team. And over the years, he has been the lead writer on some of the Archer's biggest stories, including the Helen and Rob domestic abuse story, for which he won several awards, and also the excellent Alice and alcoholism story, and most recently, the very moving episodes about the death of Jennifer Aldridge and the fallout from it. And personally, I would like to thank him for some wonderful dialogue for Lillian over the years. As an Archer's actor, you know when you get a Tim Stimpson script that you are in for some beautifully written scenes. So thank you very much, Tim. And welcome.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for those kind words. But as you know, the writers don't often get to come into studio and then see the actors. So it's always nice to hear from
them. Well, all very true.
Oh, that's great. So, Tim, you joined at the age of 23, so I know that we're looking for younger Archers listeners, but were you an Archers listener before you joined the team?
I kind of absorbed it. It was always on in the house as I was a child. My mum was a big fan of the show. So it was always kind of in my consciousness. And to my shame, I kind of, as a child, I was always like, oh, turn this rubbish off, Mum. What's the matter with you? And I remember I think my earliest Archer's memory is probably Mark being killed, and my mum getting really upset and kind of having a go at her and saying, for goodness sake, these are only imaginary people, what are you getting upset for? So when I actually got the job on the show, she was thrilled, obviously, but I kind of had to eat humble pie slightly at that point.
Does she suggest storylines to you that
she doesn't suggest them. She still often will phone me up and tell me what's just happened in the show, and I kind of have to go, I know that. I kind of either wrote it or I was in the script meeting when we were discussing it. But she's kind of, it's very sweet. She kind of still listens to it as if it is this parallel universe.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, yes, it is a parallel universe. It absolutely is. And how did you get the job, Tim?
Well, it kind of goes back to when I was at university. So I came to Birmingham to study English and drama at Birmingham Uni. And part of, one of the modules we could apply for was a radio drama course. So that was run by the then Archer's editor, Vanessa Whitburn. So she, it was like a term-long course. So we got invited over to BBC Pebble Mill, as was, before we moved to the mailbox. And I always remember the first day rolling up there and going into the recording cubicle in the radio drama studio. And there was a whole bunch of us meeting Mark Decker, now sadly not with us, who was the engineer there. And kind of one of the first things he said to us was, he said, okay, so I get the script saying 1,000 robot aliens march down the back of a spaceship. How am I going to make that sound effect? And we all kind of came up with various slightly complicated solutions to that. And in the end, he just pulled out a little plastic tub filled with nuts and bolts and kind of shook it in a marching rhythm next to a microphone, twiddled a few knobs to make it deeper and give it some reverb, and suddenly there you had it. You had all of these metal boots marching down the back of the spaceship. And something just kind of clicked in me then when it was like, wow, radio, I can just go anywhere in it, time, space, and it's unlike, film or TV, it's going to cost you pennies. So that's when I got really kind of excited about it. And then part of the module where there was going to be like a showcase at the end of the course, and three short plays written by three of us on the course, and one of them would be recorded in the radio drama studio, and the other two were like going to be performed live with people doing the sound effects in front of an audience. And so I was really determined that I was going to have mine recorded in the BBC studio, and so wrote it with loads of it had overlapping times and voiceover and all kinds of complicated stuff, so it would be absolutely impossible to do that live, and made sure that I definitely got my first little radio play recorded in the studio. And then at the end of the course, Vanessa said, if you want to get anywhere in this industry, you need to pester someone who can get you there. And, none of my family are kind of in arts or the media. So I thought, well, you're the only person I know. I will pester you. So got some work experience on the show. I spent 2 weeks over the summer there. Someone kind of whispered in my ear, they're looking for new writers. Why don't you give it a shot? I thought, heck, why not? Did a couple of trial scripts. In the meantime, I was doing a postgrad course in a year in playwriting at Birmingham, and kind of finished that. Went back home to my parents' house in Telford. Wondered what on earth I was going to do now. Went down the job centre and said, I want to be a playwright. And they looked at me as if I was completely insane and offered me a job in an Easter egg packing factory. And then a month or so later, Julie Beckett, one of the producers, phoned up and said, do you want to join the show? 6 months kind of just sitting in, learning the ropes, and then 12 episodes, and we'll see how it goes. And so that was it. And I still remember my first day kind of driving through the gates of Pebble Mill and the BBC sign and just going, oh my goodness, I'm in.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
That is. I was going to ask you what is now quite a mean question, because Sonny has already told us that you started when you were 23. So I was going to ask how long you've been writing for. Now, looking at you, I imagine that's about 5 years, is it?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. No, it's about 20.
Wow.
I think it was 20 years. I've been associated with the show for 21 years, and my first episodes went out 20 years ago.
Goodness.
So, yeah.
Did you envisage at the time, when you walked through those gates or drove through those gates, that actually 20 odd years later you'd still be, well, not at Pebble Mill, obviously we're now at the mailbox, but still with the show?
I just wanted to get through the first 12 episodes and still have a job after that. So yeah, no, I never imagined that 20 years later I'd still be here. But it's such a delightful show to be a part of. Because it's radio, so it's a small team. You really feel kind of, as a writer, really part of the show and involved with it, and your contribution matters to it. And I just love the stuff I get to write. I remember Mary Cutler, who is the longest serving writer on the show, who retired a few years ago after 40 years. So I've just got another 20 to go, and I'm going to take her record.
Well,
she said, people ask her how, are you happy to have spent so long on the show? And she says, I've written everything I could have possibly wanted to write, writing for this show. Because you get the moment to do the high drama, emotion, comedy, silly farce, everything. So it's a real pleasure, and I think you get to do it with a level of reality and sincerity that you might not necessarily get to write in other continuing series. So yeah, it's very special to me.
And talking about storylines there, Tim, I mean, how much input as writers do you get into the ideas for storylines?
Well, we're slowly, hopefully, getting back into this now, because COVID really messed things up, and we're still kind of just getting back to the old writing system. So before COVID, we'd meet every 6 months, a year, all of the team, all of the writers, and everyone's kind of invited to pitch stories, and then kind of the ones that the team like the most or the editor likes the most, depending on kind of the regime, gets picked, then be taken to the long-term meeting where everyone discusses the stories, kind of says, no, I absolutely hate it, or love it, but how about we do this? And so that's kind of when the long arc of the show is thought out, and then those kind of go back to the production team to be worked out. And then the next chance for the writers to be involved is kind of our monthly script meetings, where we get much more detailed versions of the what's going to be happening in the next 4 weeks worth of the show. And so there's a day-long script meeting, and we all get our chance to kind of, and sometimes not just the writers who are writing those scripts. Traditionally, all the team would be there. And that's great because you get people like saying, actually, I remember I wrote this back in 1983. So said this, so they might remember that now. Because the show has this incredibly long memory, which is so important to it and so important to the listeners. So yeah, that's a really valuable day when we all get to pitch in and test the stories out.
I was going to ask you about that sort of deep background for the characters, because the stuff like Jennifer was always a bit offhand with Caroline Bone because donkey's years back Caroline had an affair with Brian, that sort of thing. And then you've got birthdays and anniversaries and all that sort of stuff. How do you keep up with all of that?
Well, when I started the show, I was very fortunate. They they gave me a stack of books. So there's I'm just looking at my shelf now. So I had all of Joe Toy's novels, which were really useful.
Yeah.
So those go back to almost the beginning of the show. And the Archer's Encyclopedia, that's a really good one that I use in the Book of the Archers, that I still refer to. So I've got all of those that I look at. Oh, and the map that they give us, so you can kind of have in your head where everything is, which sounds daft, but we all need to agree what building is next to the bull,
Definitely.
how far away Blossom Hill Cottage is and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then it's and we used to have a wonderful archivist, Camilla Fisher. Oh, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a wonderful archivist, Camilla Fisher, who just had this incredible memory and would wonderfully just give you kind of slightly left field anecdotes about characters that would just. I think one was just okay. I just thought you ought to know that it was said a while ago that Neil has a lovely head of hair. just the little things like that, built in this big picture in your head. So unfortunately, Millie's not there anymore. Now we have a thing called Story Arc, which is a kind of computerized archive, and we can pull up scripts and search for character details in there and birth dates and anniversaries and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a hive mind, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a tough one for new writers coming on board because you need to know all of that backstory really well.
Yeah, and I guess if you are a new writer, you do have to do a huge amount of research before you even put pen to paper or whatever, don't you? Because of all that, and I guess you're soon picked up if you get it wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's particular stories in the script pack, we get archive notes. So it's kind of a précise version of what might be important to apply for, we get given that, and we always get given at the top of the pack birthdays and anniversaries and all of those kind of details.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So if you pitch a story and it's picked up, will you always get to write that story, or?
No. It's so every writer writes 1 week's worth of the show, so kind of Sunday through to Friday. Mm-hmm. Often the team will try and, if it's your story, might try and wherever you've been commissioned, because they ask us when we're available for commission. So the writers, just like the actors, might be working on other projects, which mean you're not available, or going on holiday, which mean you're not available. So it's a little arbitrary where your commission is going to fall. So hopefully you might get to work on your story, but no, it's kind of at that point it's very much shared out amongst the whole of the team.
Okay. And you've obviously led, some of those major storylines. I mean, how does that happen? Are you each selected for the lead writer? How does that work out?
It's not. No one's kind of ever gets given the label lead writer. But I was just very fortunate with the Rob and Helen storyline, because I kind of. Do you want to know the story how Rob and Helen came about?
Yes, please. We do.
Yeah. So I kind of came up with this idea of Rob, and at the time my idea was, I was kind of looking at the whole of the cast and thinking, blimey, we could do with some new kind of interesting younger characters to kind of start filling in, as the generations move on. and who's going to be our next Brian Aldridge, essentially. Not to just do an identikit copy of him, but who's going to be that slightly swaggering, chauvinistic, conservative with a small C, country gent kind of character. And then it was like, and who could I put him with, and where would he cause the most ripples? And it was like, well, put someone like that in the heart of Bridge Farm. That's going to annoy Pat. And I was really interested in how Helen would respond to a character like that. After everything Helen's been through in her life, I've always felt, she's someone, particularly with the anorexia, whose needs to be very much in control. And how would it be if this guy just walks into her life and goes, "Don't worry anymore, darling, I'll take care of it," kind of thing. How would she react to that? So kind of that was how I pitched Rob, and then Steve Peacock, our agricultural editor at the time, had some ideas about what kind of job he could have in the village. And so that's how he kind of entered the show. And then Vanessa retired, and Sean O'Connor came on board and phoned me up. And I think it was the first time we'd spoken. And so obviously as a writer, I was immediately... Oh, sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Obviously as a writer, I was immediately kind of terrified. Here's the new boss. Is he coming with a broom? And this, I'm just about to get fired.
Yes, yeah.
And instead he said, "Oh, I hear you kind of came up with the character of Rob. What do you think of if he gaslights Helen for 2 years, and then at the end of it she finally snaps and kills him?" And so I kind of went, "Oh yes, sure. That sounds like a brilliant idea," which it was. But it wasn't as if I was going to say anything else to my new boss. But it absolutely was a brilliant idea. And so it kind of went forward from that. So I think generally we try to shuffle the schedule around a bit. So and I was just fortunate that I was given those the really big scenes to write, and then obviously then going on and doing the court week, and then doing the special jury episode that I wrote. So yeah, it was. I was just very, very fortunate that I was kind of really given ownership of that story in a lot of ways.
And what a fabulous story it was. I mean, it really was. Yeah. So beautifully written, so well played, and I just think it was brilliant that The Archers was, which often people think, oh, it's cricket on the green, oh, it's the flower and produce show, but actually was able to do something as powerful as that and had such an effect on the world as that, and changed people's lives, actually. Brilliant. It was brilliant.
It was.
Yeah, it was. I don't think any of us could have predicted the effect it would have. We knew it was a big story, but it wouldn't have the repercussions. And I think part of the Archer's power is that because you do have those ordinary times where it is just the ordinary warp and weft of kind of rural life. And so when something like that happens, and I think something so insidious that could be happening behind any cottage door, it was even more powerful. And it really struck us because we did lots of research on the story and with Women's Aid and Refuge, and got told just horrific stories of just the twisted things some abusers would do that you just wouldn't believe. The one that's always stuck in my head was some guy who replaced all of the size labels in his wife's clothes so that he could accuse her of putting on weight.
Oh God.
And you just go, how do you sit there with your needle and thread and think you're just you're the person in the right? It's just extraordinary. But actually with the show we discovered those extreme things, you just didn't need them. You just tiny little things like Rob just saying, "Oh, I don't like that dressed up."
Yes.
And you immediately saw on Twitter or wherever the audience just picking up on it. And going, "Oh my God, he's awful, he's controlling." So often less was more, and we've learned with that story.
And of course the idea. Sorry, James.
So I was going to say probably the same as you, Sonny, that the great thing is that unlike on TV, on the soaps there, you've got time. You could take that 2 years to unfold. And as an audience, we gradually began to think, is there something a bit off about him?
Yes.
Is that, or is it just Helen being difficult?
Yes.
So it was just fantastic the way that it unfolded in real time.
Yeah.
Because
we became Helen too. We became, as you say, the question mark in the head. Am I really? Is he? That was what was so clever about it. Indeed. And also, thinking more recently, the Alice and the alcoholism story, which again, we can take it in slow time, and you are with her so much, the backwards and forwardsing, thinking that she's got through it, and then that has always been very, very powerful as well. Very powerful indeed.
That story was kind of in some ways slightly the saving grace of COVID for us, because there were so many stories that we were running or we had in the pipeline that we had to throw out because you could no longer have people gathering in the Bull or at the Fates. They're just stories that weren't credible to tell anymore. And obviously a story like Alice's alcoholism was, ideal for something where we had to shift to two-handers and three-handers and much more kind of home-based stories. So yeah, it kind of seized onto that when COVID happened and put that right at the centre of the show.
So it was always there as a potential storyline, Tim, was it? It was
always there. It was always planned. But I can't remember if we pulled it forward. But I just remember that it was kind of one of the very few stories that we could still run with, because most of the show was pretty much a blank sheet of paper. It was just like start again.
And how...
those, sorry, I keep interrupting.
No, it's fine.
Just those stories that got lost because of COVID and lockdown, have they gone forever? Do you think some of them will come back? Can you tell us what some of them were that won't come back?
I'm just trying to think. I remember very clearly I was almost finished a week's worth of episodes when we got called up and just said we can't make the show, stop writing. So, we're not going to be able to make these episodes. And I kind of we've seen it coming, really. Obviously you just, when's it going to happen? I'll just keep writing and keep my fingers crossed, but I don't see how this is going to pan out. So just shut the computer down and kind of walked away and wondered what on earth was going to happen next.
Gosh.
I think we had Kirsty, and Kirsty's wedding was planned to Philip.
Yeah.
And that had to all go in the bin, and then happened about a year later, if I remember rightly. My memory of the storylines is always really tricky, because I'm always thinking 3 months ahead, or even like long term, I'm writing up some long terms at the moment, 6 months, a year down the line. So I've always struggled to remember when things have actually happened on air, because I've got like 3 different timelines going on in my head at once.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously for everybody, COVID was just extraordinary, but you as writers, I mean, I know what happened to us as actors, but can you just take us through what happened for you as writers? I mean, did Jeremy, who was our editor, ring up and say, this is what we're going to do? How did all that work out? Did you all get your heads together as to what you were going to do?
It was like, stop writing, we're going to have to see how we can do this, just kind of hold fire. Then I think I can't remember when we heard that the show was going to have to come off air for 3 weeks, so there was going to be kind of highlights, and then this idea of the monologues came along, and we all got called up and told this is how it's going to be working, and it was just all hands to the pump, really. It all happened so quickly. I find it hard to remember exactly what it was like. It feels like, I don't know about you, but it feels like a different world now.
Absolutely. And just, sorry, Tim.
No, I was just going to say, so I think it was, okay, we're going to do these as monologues. These are the characters you've got. These are the kind of story. This is kind of the storyline. We need the episodes in 5 days.
Yeah.
Gosh. And so we were kind of, because we just needed, so much had gone in the bin, we needed to immediately start getting stuff back in the can again. And so we were kind of having to invent this new form of telling the Archers as we were writing it. So it was those first monologues episodes were really tough, and trying to find a shared voice for it. How do you, you've got a bunch of writers all writing simultaneously and all approaching the monologue style in a slightly different way. So finding a kind of a new voice for the show that we all understood and could write in that style. It was really, it was crazy.
It was crazy. And from an actor's point of view, it's interesting what you're saying about the style of the monologues. I can remember us, in the early days, talking to various producers as we were doing it all down the line, of course. How are we going to do this? Is it going to be very intimate, or, are we going to be more we had it was the style was going on for us as well. is the listener in my head, or it was all that. It was because we were on air doing it, weren't we? We were practicing, we were rehearsing on air. We just had to do it. We had to get it out there. You and the writers, and us as the actors. There was no trial and error period. It was just out there.
And I guess as writers, you were. I mean, I know that you're limited to which actors you can use because some people are not available, and you can only have so many actors in an episode or in a week or whatever.
Yeah.
But during lockdown, presumably you were constrained by who'd managed to get a microphone to the recording equipment to their house and get it set up.
For us, it was very much we were just told what to write at the particularly the beginning of lockdown, because so little was possible. So basically, the production team were just working hell for leather to work out who was available, who could record, what stories we could tell with those characters. And so once it got to the writers, we were literally told, these are the characters, this is what needs to happen in each scene.
Yeah, just
go and write the dialogue.
Yeah.
So because there just wasn't any room for kind of creative discussions, it was like literally what is practically possible here, go away and do it.
Just get on and do it. Just going back to the Archers generally and in normal times, who decides on the introduction of a new character, Tim? For instance, someone like Joy, who's come in. How does that develop?
Sometimes those will be suggested again in those long-term meetings. So that's how I suggested Rob. I pitched this idea of this new partner for Helen and kind of the beginnings of their relationship. Sometimes as a story is going along, so whilst the writers are kind of writing the episodes, simultaneously the production team are working on kind of the next block and writing the script pack for the next block after the scripts that are currently being written. So they're working out the next 4 weeks of where the story is going. And sometimes it'll be a case of, actually, the way we could tell this story, if we bring in this new character, that might have a new way of opening up the story. That's particularly true of often if they're kind of relatives that we might have heard about in passing. That we want to actually, we could bring them in for a couple of weeks and see what that does. So it comes from a few directions, and then it's it's this case of just the team learning exactly who this character is. So, for instance, I remember kind of when Adil joined the show, and just a lot of we had I think Nyla, one of our writers, had wrote up a little biography for him, which we all had. But then it's a case of, as you're writing the scripts and doing the rewrites again, because there's writers writing simultaneously about finding that voice. And then, of course, you then, a few weeks later, you then hear it on air. And suddenly there's the actor. I mean, this happened a little bit with Rob, I think. Sean would say that, there's always just something in the back of his voice that went, this guy's no good. Yeah. And starts... So I feel it always takes about 3 months, 6 months, depending on how many episodes that character has got, to totally find who the character is. And it's this shared thing of the writers giving it to the actor responding to it, and then us hearing it, and then going, oh, actually, maybe that character's a bit more like this. Yeah. Right. Until we all kind of come to this consensus about exactly, it's all just fine tuning. Yeah. We know the broad points about the character. Yeah. But just finding exactly who they are is again, it's the hive mind. It's everyone learning who that's going to be.
Exactly. I mean, look at the way that Lillian's developed over the last 20 odd years, because she was very different when she first came back, on the back of that motorbike.
And I think it's interesting is what you're saying, Tim, because I can't remember which writer it was, but I think in one episode in the early days, because as you say, we're all finding it. I mean, the production team and editor, because it was Vanessa at the time when I came into the programme, Vanessa Whitburn, they had a three-dimensional kind of feel about but I had to flesh her out. Yeah. And I think one of the writers in one episode used darling quite a lot at the end of a line. And I thought, that's a nice one, and it is, as you say, you grow together, don't you? And other writers think, oh yes, that's. Do you eventually get to hear the actor's voice in your head when you're writing for some characters?
Yeah, often.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you.
Yes. Yeah. And presumably that must help. Obviously it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm blessed. I could always hear Angie Jennifer in my head, so I was writing her.
Yeah.
Because Jennifer is absolutely one of my favourite characters. So I was honoured and rather sad to have to say goodbye to that character. But you always could hear the kind of just the sheen Angie would give to a line. You could write a very boring line and you just know she'd give it that Jennifer spin.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It was like half your work being done for you in a way. It was great.
Yeah.
Yes, and they were beautifully written. All those scenes, the leaving of Jennifer, and I thank you very much for that. Beautifully written, and we were all in tears in the studio when we were recording it because. You are family in the Archers. I mean, do you feel very much like that as writers as well, Tim?
Absolutely. I mean, I wish we could spend more time with the actors in a way. It's again, particularly after COVID, it'll be lovely. I do try and come into studio when I can. And I was just very conscious. We all were. The whole team was just writing that week of it being a farewell to the character and also a tribute to Angie simultaneously, and also having to and just the practical stuff of one, having to make it still entertaining for dramatic things to still be happening for the week that were going to propel the story forward, and two, always aware, as you always have to be when you're writing any story really, is new listeners who Jennifer's 60 years in the show, and so I was conscious of writing all the stuff about them discovering her diary. A lot of people might not know that she had been a writer years back, so it was kind of having to tell all that biography at the same time as pushing the story forward whilst paying tribute to the character and the actor. So it was a wonderful week to write, but well, it was quite a responsibility.
Absolutely, but beautifully textured, and I think the ramifications of all that, the fallout now,
amazing.
Which will go on and on and on. It seems to me in lots of different ways.
Yeah, well, the Aldridges are always brilliant for that.
So with
the most dysfunctional family in Amber.
Oh, really?
Always rich pickings.
Yes.
So with all, because there are so many strands coming out of the story, aren't there? Did one person come up with all these different strands, or did everyone kind of get their heads together and say, well, when this happens, this could happen to Rory, this could happen to Alice, this might happen?
I think there have been some discussions within the production team led by Jeremy, the editor, Jeremy Howe. So I think he wrote up a kind of a broad structure for the week.
Right.
Then we all had that was kind of our starting point. Then we all had a Zoom meeting to pitch in other ideas and kind of how we thought we needed to treat the week and where we wanted to reach by the end of the week, finding that tone for the end of it. So I think I suggested let's get Brian down the pub at the end of the week and just start opening it up again.
Yeah.
We knew it was going to be this very intense week. Lots, it was all going to be scenes with the Aldridge family, and then of course there was going to be, then the following week we were going to open up to the village a bit more, and so it was this idea of the village kind of putting their arm around Brian and him being a bit surprised that they were treating him in that way, because I think Brian is aware of his reputation in the village.
Indeed.
Wasn't necessarily expecting to get too much sympathy. So then myself and Julie Beckett kind of then worked on really writing up a complete storyline for that week. And then once that had then been kind of looked at and approved and amended by the production team and Jeremy coming in with their notes, then it was kind of back down to the normal script writing process of them putting together a synopsis, a scene by, so that's what's going to happen in every episode, in every scene, casting it, and then then we're into the normal script writing process. Yeah,
well, it's been monumentally successful. As a listener, just been absolutely gripped. Just so many tender moments. And the bit where Susan goes and has it out with Brian, that was wonderful. Good old Susan.
And
I
you
don't always say that, but good old Susan.
and you see the development of the potential of the relationship between her and Alice now that Jennifer has gone.
Yeah.
The beautiful,
lovely.
beautiful little scene that I listened to the other day. Yeah, it's the potential, how things are going to change. The dynamics within the family now are going to change, and Alice herself sort of almost becoming maternal within the Aldridges as well. It is fascinating.
Yeah.
It is absolutely fascinating. Do you, slightly off-piste with it here, Tim, but when you are writing the scripts, I mean, I asked you before if you hear the actors' voices in your heads, but when you've got a finished script, is it very internal in your head, or do you read a script out to yourself? I mean, out loud? Or how does that work for you?
I'm a terrible proofreader. I cannot read in my head and see my own mistakes.
Right.
I just gloss over them. So the last thing I do is I try to read out the script really robotically, just essentially to catch the typos.
Yeah.
And within half a page, I'm acting the thing. And I'm starting to rewrite it again and oh no, that line. And it's like, no, these have to be in at 8 a.m. It's midnight now. Come on.
Yeah.
I do find myself
you out loud
them out sometimes.
But I think that's quite interesting because your lines. Everyone is a wonderful scriptwriter on The Archers, but your lines particularly are always very sayable, I would say, as an actor. And I just wonder if that's why it was interesting to see how you looked at a project and thought, well, hang on, maybe we don't need those words, or do you know what I mean? Or with the rephrasing of things. Sometimes I wonder.
I have this thing with rhythm. I always sometimes often with a stream of dialogue, I'll hear I go, I needed this to be a dum to dum to dum line, or a diddly dum line.
Yes.
And then it's like trying to think of the actual words to fit it.
Yes.
But often it's like I feel the rhythm of the dialogue before I know what the actual words need to be.
That really resonates with me. I can remember writing stuff for Sonny and spending ages Googling names of biscuits so I could come up with a biscuit that's got the right rhythm to it. Because custard cream doesn't work, but what is going to
Garibaldi maybe.
Yeah,
Absolutely. No, it's about rhythm, isn't it? So much is about that internal rhythm.
And also with radio, knowing where you want to put in those silences as well.
Yes, absolutely. We're not to say it.
We're not to.
And I guess, is it also for the writer as well, because it is that thing of handing over to the actor and the director, I suppose, to a certain extent. But do you think as well in your head, I needn't overwrite because the actor may take it on its next bit of the journey? Is that something that's in your head, Tim, as you're writing?
It's always a tricky one. I think generally we're told to kind of put in guidance. Yeah. Just because the show is recorded so quickly.
Yeah.
What is it? 2 hours in studio to do the whole thing.
Absolutely.
So if there's a very specific way you think the line needs to be read, or the emotion, particularly if you're doing something that's got lots of subtext, there's a lot going underneath it. There's a feeling of there's not going to be a lot of time to explore this in rehearsal. Like if you were writing a play or something, I better just write it boldly in the script what I need from that line. But it is nice to one of the things I love about writing, and I love about writing drama, and specifically, is just that it is a shared endeavour.
Yes.
And I just love hearing the lines being lifted up off the page and maybe being done not as I expected.
Yeah.
Sometimes, obviously, I listen and I go, "Oh, that wasn't what I wanted.
Yes,
That wasn't what I meant at all."
I'm sure.
More often than not, it's like, "Oh, brilliant."
Yeah. No, I'm sure I can imagine that. Banging. I think, "Oh no, I didn't mean it. Why is she saying it like that?" No, and of course you've got the time restraint, Tim, haven't you? So you've got to get a certain amount of information out in one episode, but you've also got a time restraint on that and length of scenes and so on, haven't you?
And number of actors.
Absolutely.
Speaking of actors, Ambridge sort of famously has this very rich landscape of silent characters, and occasionally one of them gets a voice. I mean, Julia Pargeter was silent for donkey's years, wasn't she? And Prue Forrest as well. So, and then there are other characters who suddenly go silent, like Lewis. So, what does it take for a silent character to get a voice? So, will we ever hear Sabrina?
I think sometimes I think, particularly kind of when we expanded the horror bins,
Yeah.
it was suddenly hearing those voices was really integral to the stories we wanted to start telling. I think there are some like Sabrina where you just think that would just spoil it now.
Yes.
You think, because part of the pleasure of the silence, people, you all know how much, some people really don't want to see the actor who plays the character because they've got that, that image in their head. I think for the silence, that's even more so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think everyone's got their own Sabrina
Yeah.
in their head, and to suddenly give that a voice would spoil the conceit in a way and the fun of it. Yeah, so...
And it'd be very stressful for the actor who was going to come in and do it as well. They probably did Valium, love Valium.
Absolutely.
It would. No, I'm glad, because I've certainly got an internalised Sabrina, and I've no idea how other people do, but she's very, very, very specific to me.
Yes.
I must just say, as we're talking about silent characters, so Adrian Flynn, one of our writers, who very, very sadly died recently. I just want to pay tribute to Adrian, who I loved dearly and was on the team when I started, and was so generous and helpful to me always. He was a wonderful writer to have around the script conference table, and everyone misses him hugely. But his thing was the silent characters. I think he loved the silent characters more than he loved the rest of them. Like he invented, I remember him invented the whole of the Button family.
Oh, the Buttons.
Mr. Button, the mushroom expert.
Yeah.
Just brilliant, all that. Yeah. No, I can imagine that's great fun, because in fact you can take the silent characters as writers wherever you want to go, can't you?
Absolutely.
With no restraint.
But you still need to be consistent with them, don't you? Just as much as with the speaking characters. You can't suddenly have Sabrina slumming around Ambridge in jogging bottoms or something. It's
absolutely. No, I'll look them up just as often as I do the other characters, like on our database that I was talking about. What did Mr. Pullen do last?
Mr. Pullen.
Derek Fletcher. Mandy Beesborough. They're all there, aren't they? Gosh.
They are. And how aware do you need to be, thinking, going on from silent characters to noise, I suppose? How aware do you need to be of the soundscape? So do you write in the background noises, or does somebody else fill that in?
No, we do all of that. I mean, sometimes the kind of the general atmosphere, don't put in bird song at the top of every exterior scene. But yeah, all again for me that's again, if I wasn't writing all of that stuff, it would that would be half the job being done for doing radio. So one of the, sorry to keep going back to COVID, but that was one of the hardest things with COVID, was then the limitations on sound effects apart from everything else.
Of course.
And not being able to, I think this is slowly changing the studio, but still we're limited to only one person being able to make a sound effect.
Oh, are you?
So like if someone pours a pot of tea, you can't have then someone else stirring the cup. It's those sound effects have only got to come from one actor, because the sound effects person is in their own segregated booth kind of thing. I think that's how I understand.
You're
it's
right.
really hard as a writer as well because we couldn't get into studio for a long time, so we didn't actually know what the setup was. It was all being described to us. But and for me, hearing a teaspoon round a cup can be a really important moment in a scene. Just to indicate exactly what the character is feeling. You use all of those things to make up for the fact that you can't see them. So I litter my scripts, if I'm allowed to, with sound effects.
I didn't realise that you were still so constrained in studio.
We're now back. We've just gone back to potentially sharing microphones, but still for some scenes, because before we always did a scene around one microphone. And as Tim said, for instance, if we would in lovely Jennifer's Kitchen, it always comes to mind because I had so many scenes with Angie in Jennifer's Kitchen, and we would be round a table, as you say, Tim, three of us round a table, and somebody would be drinking tea, somebody would be opening a paper, somebody would be serving a tea, Ness would be, Ness is the person who does the spot effects, so she does a lot of the sound effects, but we could equally, if we had a hand free, also help with that, maybe picking up a teacup, and as you say, it just brings the the dimension to a scene, doesn't it? You know, somebody even putting a cup down, there's an attitude can be with that, and so on.
Absolutely.
You know, but yeah, we are still very limited. In fact, I recorded a scene the other day. I'm not going to say what that scene was, but again, it was a scene where we were all together drinking, and we had to be quite separate. And I thought, I remember the days when we were in the Bull, and it was, you know, we were able all to be leaning on the bar, and you know, it'll come back hopefully in time. But you know, I can imagine, Tim, for you guys as writers, it's it's the texture within that as well, isn't it, for you?
It is, and it's just really hard to remember sometimes as well.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you're writing a scene and you're in it in your head, and you write, you know, so and so, you know, is giving Alistair's giving the sheep an injection and whatever else, and then you finish writing the scene and look back at it and go, I can't do that. Can I?
Can't do
I have
it.
to go back and rejig the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's so multi-layered, Tim. I guess, is this the most complicated thing about being an Archer's writer, just the number of layers that you're dealing with?
I think the most complicated thing is casting it. Right. Everyone's always really shocked because you know, you can only have so many characters per episode.
Yeah.
And often there aren't, because no one's on a contract on the Archers, you know, there might be unavailabilities, or some actors might only be available for certain studios which aren't the same as the episode that you're writing for, so then you have to start swapping episodes and jiggling all around. So it's kind of, before you start thinking about any of the kind of creative artistic stuff, it's trying to work out, how am I going to tell this story with only this number of characters, and I can only have, you know, and you know, but if I have that character in that episode, then I can't have this character. But if I swap it there, you know, it really is like a Rubik's cube. And it's like, once you've got that solved, I always like sit back with relief. It's like, that feels like the really tricky bit done with, and now I can actually start telling the stories.
Yeah, I can see that. And you might end up with, the people that you've got are all from quite disparate parts of the village. They're not necessarily part of the same family or whatever, which is, I guess, where some of those lovely relationships have developed, like Tracy and Oliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some fun moments where you go, so I've got those actors. They're not they don't have the same storyline. I could keep them entirely separate. But what if they did bump into each other in the village shop? What would they say to each other? It's kind of fun sometimes just to have those clashes with characters that don't normally share the airwaves together.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's true.
Yes.
I know that time's marching, but I just want to ask you a little bit about Ambridge Extra.
Oh yes,
which I still miss. So that was 2011, I think that started, and you were really integral to that, weren't you?
Yeah.
That was your baby.
It was Vanessa Whitburn's idea. She pitched it to, was it 4 Extra, and so, you know, so it was when BBC 7 got rebranded as 4 Extra, and you know, and trying to attract audience over to this newish digital channel. So yes, it was Vanessa's idea, and she invited a couple of us on to kind of step aside from the main show and create these standalone series for Ambridge Extra, which is enormous fun, because it's a different thing from when you know there's going to be an end to a story.
Yeah.
And you know, and trying to find this balance between stories that were going to be really compelling but weren't necessarily integral to the main show. You know, so the very, very difficult balance to get. Kind of, you don't need to hear this story, but you should.
Yes. And I guess it was tricky weaving those stories in with the main show as well, and must have been a bit like a military exercise in some way.
Absolutely, and particularly Matt and Lillian's exploits in Russia.
Yes.
I have to say.
Which were great fun, Tim. I can't tell you, some of my
such fun.
favourite moments, I have to say, on radio, doing that with Kim. Yeah, great. Yeah, but as you say, weaving them into what was happening in the mainland, as it were.
Absolutely. We had some extraordinary research meetings with that. Like, we had someone from BBC World Service, a Russian correspondent, come and speak to us for a couple of hours, and just talking about the kind of the machinations of the, you know, Russian mafia and the FSB and all the rest of it. It's just terrifying, you know. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff, you know, that we put in there, you know, like when Matt went back to his hotel room and could tell someone had been in there, that's all from the research of what really can happen to people, you know, just this low level intimidation.
Yeah.
Were you very disappointed when it finished?
Yeah, it was it was real fun to work on. But I think we all knew that there was not going to be the money to make it a permanent running thing. So it was going to have a finite lifespan. But yeah, I think one of the things I love that the Archers does is the spin-off kind of shows like Blithe Spirit or Canterbury Tales and all those. I'm really glad we get to. We still get to do things that are separate from the main show.
Yeah.
I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, me too.
It is. Because there were 5 series you did.
I did 4 of them, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just fun, like the second one, having, it was kind of a warm-up for the COVID monologues, we did interior monologues for that series.
Yeah.
So there was just this freedom to try out slightly different formats.
Yeah, just experiment with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. I loved it. As well as writing for radio, Tim, you do write. It's not just that all you do. You write for TV, you write for theatre, and you've written for the big things in TV, haven't you? Casualty, EastEnders, and Doctors, and so on.
Yeah.
And theatre all over the country. What's your favourite medium to write for?
My deep down theatre is like walking into a theatre. It still gives me that special buzz, and I love the process, the rehearsal process as well.
Right.
Which and just being able to work on a script with actors is a real luxury and a pleasure. So theatre and radio are kind of where my real heart is. I think, definitely.
How is your experience on EastEnders? Is it? Everyone says it's incredibly, very, very fast from everybody's point of view. Is it?
Just incredibly intense. You never quite know when you finish the job. So I thought I'd finally sent in my shooting scripts and went away for a weekend break, exhausted, and got phoned up and said such and such had happened. We need you to rewrite these scenes, and it's. And a much more organic process than on the Archers, because the Archers is made so quickly. So we do one draft, and then it's sometimes called the second draft, but really that's just rewrites of specific scenes, and then that's it. Whereas on a show like EastEnders, at least when I was there, I think it was like 3 drafts of the scene by scene, and then 4 drafts of the scripts. Casualty, I think, at least when I was there, was 8 drafts.
Wow.
Some there are things like you do a medical draft, and that's where you have to have all your medical research nailed down, and then there'll be so and within that there's a lot more toing and froing with what's going to happen in the stories, so you can just lose entire, like your C story. I did a Casualty episode where I think I'd written the first script, and then it was like the C story just isn't working for a variety of reasons, that not just mine, just in terms of when again, all just the practicalities when an actor is available and when shooting can happen, and it was just like, we can't do this, and so just strip out that entire story and we'll think of something else for you to weave in. So it's you're juggling a lot in story time, whereas the Archers, we kind of the script meeting, the synopsis, and then once you've got that, it's kind of this is now what we're doing, unless something really goes wrong, and it's like, no, we really need to think that. So yeah, it's full on, it's TV.
Yes. I suppose it's creative, but in a slightly different way, isn't it? It's a bit, there's a bit more pressure there in a different
and it's just way. Such a bigger machine.
Yeah.
You're answering to so many more people.
Yeah.
All with all of whom have their opinions. Yeah. So it's just more intense.
Well, I, for one, I think it's only for 2. Very, very, very glad that you write for radio, and especially for the Archers, and we hope you're going to continue to do so for many, many, many years to come.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much for talking to us today, Tim. It's been absolutely fascinating, hasn't it, Sonny?
Really brilliant. Thank you so very much. Yeah.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thanks for listening to our One Stiletto in the Grave podcast. If you'd like to see behind-the-scenes clips and bonus content, please visit our Facebook page, One Stiletto in the Grave podcast. And if you'd like to ask any questions, follow us on Twitter at OneStiletto65. This podcast is produced by Raggedy House Productions and the music composed by Tom Smith. See you next time!